The smell hits you first. Wood smoke, salt marsh, human waste baking in the Virginia sun. Then the sound. The rhythmic thunk of axes against virgin timber, the screech of iron saws, and underneath it all the low buzz of mosquitoes so thick they form visible clouds in the evening air. Welcome to Jamestown, in the year 1607. This isn't the sanitized colonial village you visited on a school field trip. This is desperation made flesh, ambition rotting in subtropical heat, and the first brutal chapter of what will become America. Through AI reconstruction based on archaeological surveys, surviving letters, and the forensic analysis of trash pits and burial sites, we've rebuilt the Jamestown that actually existed. Not the myth, the reality. And that reality is far stranger and more visceral than anything you learned in textbooks. Our journey today takes us inside the triangular wooden fort during its most crucial and deadly period. We'll walk the muddy lanes between crude structures, peer into the homes of gentlemen who've never held an axe, and stand at the edge of the James River where ships arrive carrying both salvation and disease. By the end, you'll understand why nearly 80% of the first colonists died within months, and why the survivors did things that still haunt the historical record. We start at the river's edge because that's where everyone's eyes are constantly drawn. The James River in 1607 is wider than you'd expect, nearly 3 miles across at this point, and the water has a brownish tint from the tidal flow mixing fresh and salt water. 3 ships, the Susan Constant, Godspeed and Discovery, sit anchored offshore. They're smaller than you'd imagine. Cramped wooden boxes that carried 104 men across the Atlantic for 4 brutal months. I say men deliberately. There are no women here yet. That decision alone tells you everything about what the Virginia Company thought this venture was about. This isn't a colony. It's a military operation disguised as a settlement, a beachhead for extracting wealth. The landing site itself was chosen for all the wrong reasons. It's a marshy peninsula, barely connected to the mainland, which makes it defensible against Spanish attack. But defensible against Europeans means vulnerable to everything else. The ground is swampy, the water is brackish, the air breeds disease. Within weeks, men are dying from typhoid and dysentery, their bodies dumped in shallow graves outside the fort walls. Walk with me now through the main gate. The fort is a triangle, each side roughly 140 yards long, with bulwarks at each corner mounting small cannon. The walls are made of upright logs, sharpened at the top, packed so tightly together that you can barely see through the gaps. But look closer. Notice how green some of that wood still is. Ow. They built this in less than a month, and it shows. Some logs are already beginning to split in the heat. The interior is chaos organised by desperation. There are perhaps 20 structures crammed inside this triangle, most of them nothing more than wattle and daub huts with thatched roofs. The wealthy investors back in London imagined neat rows of cottages. What actually exists are lean-tos and hovels that wouldn't survive an English winter, let alone a Virginia summer. The church stands near the centre, though calling it a church is generous. It's a wooden frame with a canvas sail stretched over it for a roof. This is where Captain John Smith will later be tried and nearly executed. This is where Pocahontas will supposedly save his life, though whether that actually happened the way Smith described it is still debated by historians who've analysed his tendency toward self-mythologizing. But here's what strikes you most powerfully. The silence between the noise. These men don't know what they're doing. Half of them are gentlemen who've never performed manual labour. They stand around in their English wool clothing, sweating through fabric meant for a completely different climate, arguing about matters of rank and precedent while the forest presses in on all sides. The other half are labourers and craftsmen. But they're weakened by the voyage and the immediate onset of disease. You can see it in their movements, the way they lean against walls, the hollow look in their eyes. They're already dying, and summer has barely begun. We move toward the storehouse, the most important structure in the fort. This is where all the supplies from England are kept. Salted pork, hardtack biscuits, peas, beer. The rations are calculated to last a certain number of months, but those calculations assumed they'd quickly establish farming and supplement their stores with local resources. That hasn't happened. The gentlemen refuse to farm because it's beneath their station. The labourers are too sick to work effectively, and the local Powhatan people, who could teach them which plants are edible and how to grow corn in this climate, are watching from the forest with understandable suspicion. What the colonists don't yet realise is that they've arrived during the worst drought in 700 years. Scientists analysing tree rings centuries later will discover this, but in 1607 all they know is that the land they were promised as paradise feels like a fever dream, and the gold they were sent to find doesn't exist. The real horror, though, is still months away. Right now, in these early weeks, there's still hope. Still the belief that English ingenuity and determination will prevail. Still the assumption that civilization can be imposed on wilderness through sheer force of will. They have no idea what's coming. The starving time of 1609 will reduce this settlement to something unrecognizable. But that's a story that demands its own telling. For now, we leave the fort and walk toward the river's edge. The James stretches wide here, deceptively calm in the morning light. But look at the water itself. Notice how it barely moves. This isn't the rushing current you'd expect. The location the colonists chose is essentially a tidal zone where salt water mixes with fresh during high tide. They're drinking brackish water and it's killing them. Typhoid, dysentery, salt poisoning. The very resource they needed most is contaminated by their own waste flowing back upstream with the tide. A small group of men are attempting to fish, but they're using techniques that worked in English rivers. The fish here don't cooperate. One man curses as his line snaps. Another sits motionless, staring at the water as if willing it to provide. These aren't explorers or adventurers. They're desperate employees of a joint stock company, sent here to generate profits for shareholders who've never seen a mosquito the size of a hornet, or felt humidity that turns the air into soup. The forest begins just beyond the cleared ground. It's not the tamed woodland of England with its carefully managed hunting preserves. This is old-growth wilderness, so dense that sunlight barely penetrates. The trees here are species they don't recognise. The sounds are alien. At night they hear screams from animals they can't identify. Some men swear they've seen wolves. Others claim bears. The truth is they don't know what's out there, and that ignorance terrifies them more than any specific threat. Let me show you something they haven't discovered yet. About a mile upriver, there's a Powhatan village. Right now, as we stand here, the people there are watching the fort. They've been watching since the ships arrived. The English assume they're hidden, protected by their walls and their firearms. But the Powhatan know exactly how many men are in that fort, exactly how sick they are, exactly how unprepared. They're making calculations of their own. The initial curiosity about these strange newcomers is shifting into something more complex. These pale men have weapons that make thunder, yes, but they're also weak, disorganized, and clearly don't understand the land. The question the Powhatan are asking isn't whether they could destroy this settlement. It's whether these foreigners are worth destroying, or if they'll simply die on their own. Back at the fort, the afternoon brings no relief from the heat. Men are collapsing now. One lies in the shade of the wall, his skin yellow with jaundice. Another vomits into the dirt, too weak to make it to the latrine ditch. The smell is overwhelming. Human waste, rotting food, unwashed bodies in wool clothing. This is what the birthplace of English America actually smells like. There's no romance here, no grand destiny visible in this moment, just suffering and stubborn English refusal to admit failure. Captain Newport, the expedition leader, stands near his ship. He'll be sailing back to England soon, leaving the colonists behind. He's making notes for his report to the Virginia Company. He'll need to explain why they haven't found gold, why they haven't discovered the passage to the Pacific, why half the men will be dead before he returns. But he'll also need to convince the investors to send more supplies, more men, more money. The colony must appear viable even when it clearly isn't. This tension between reality and reporting will define Jamestown for years. Walk with me one more time through the fort's interior. See that man repairing a musket? His name is lost to history, but his hands tell a story. They're skilled, careful. He understands that these weapons are the thin line between survival and annihilation. When they work, they give the English a temporary advantage. When they fail, as they often do in this humidity, the colonists become just another group of foreigners who underestimated America. The sun is setting now, the temperature finally drops below unbearable. Men emerge from wherever they've been hiding from the heat. Someone starts a cooking fire. The smell of salt pork fills the air, briefly masking the other odours. For a moment, just a moment, it almost feels like this might work. Like civilization might take root in this impossible place. But you and I know what they don't. We know that within months the death rate will be catastrophic. We know that they'll resort to eating dogs, rats, and eventually things we don't speak about in polite historical accounts. We know that this fort will burn and be rebuilt, that the colonists will war with the Powhatan, that tobacco will eventually save the colony when nothing else could, that the year 1619 will bring the first enslaved Africans to these shores, setting in motion centuries of consequences. We know that from these desperate, dying men will somehow emerge a society that will eventually challenge the very empire that sent them here. But standing here in 1607, none of that is written yet. There's only heat, disease, fear, and a slowly darkening sky over a fort that shouldn't exist but does. The English have planted their flag in Virginia soil. Whether they'll live to see it still flying by winter is another question entirely. So that's Jamestown, not the bronze plaques and reconstructed buildings you can visit today, but the actual place where it all began. The mud, the death, the staggering miscalculation of what it would take to establish a permanent foothold in the New World. These weren't heroes in the moment. They were employees dying for a company that had promised investors a return. Most of them never saw England again. Their bones are still here, mixed into the soil beneath parking lots and visitor centres. What strikes you most after walking these reconstructed grounds isn't the bravery or the vision. It's the sheer improbability that anyone survived at all. That from this collection of fever-ravaged gentlemen and dying labourers, something permanent eventually emerged. The Jamestown of 1607 failed in every measurable way. It found no gold, no passage to the Pacific, no easy wealth. What it did was survive just long enough to be reinforced, resupplied, and given another chance to fail slightly less catastrophically. The real story of Jamestown isn't inspiration. It's endurance. The kind of grim, unglamorous persistence that doesn't make it into founding mythology, but probably should, because that quality, more than anything else, is what actually built America.